Hey, this is Writers Row, where we talk about all things writing, including Twitter's writing community, the creative and business side of writing, and make sure that you subscribe if you like the content we've been putting out, like this video, and give us a comment on things you want to talk about. As always, you are joined by DC Wright-Hammer, myself, sci-fi thriller writer for the Between Two Minds series. On the other side, David Gane. He is the co-writer of the mystery series Shepherd and Wolf. And we're going to jump right in and see how David is doing today. How are you, David?
I am well. I am trying to get back to writing. We had a big weekend of doing a pop-up sale, and it was fantastic except for the rain. How about you, DC?
I'm doing well. I have been doing a little more writing, as I've been talking about in the last few episodes. That's going well. Feeling stronger about the things I'm writing. I'm getting back into it. And I am getting my websites in order. I recently took writehammer.com live. That was about a month ago. And I've always had Hammerstone Creative. That's my publishing company. Had that out there for a while. I wanted to move that over and get it in the same space as writehammer.com, where I can build it out more professionally and feel that it's more quality. So I spent part of the weekend digging into getting all that lined up, and I finally was able to do it. So
People can go over there now and look at it.
Not on hammerstonecreativeyet.com. My old site is still live at hammerstonecreative.wordpress.com. All the content that was over there and people know about, that's still there. I'm in the process of still building it out. I just got it all over to GoDaddy, which is where I host writehammer.com. And so now I have both websites in one. It's a little technical, but it's something that we kind of have to deal with if we're going to have websites. So
it's such, I have to say that's one of those things that you're like, I just want to go and write the books and everything, but then you have to deal with all that kind of stuff, and it becomes such a pain in the butt.
Yeah. And I think I know we have a topic for this episode, but I think a future episode would be a great topic for what are the things that independent authors do have, should have, could have, things like that. And I think we should talk about that in the future.
We should find ourselves a special guest for that.
I think we can do that.
Awesome.
Well, no, if anybody out there kind of specializes in the different things, I guess, like website and any other spaces that indie authors need to be in to promote themselves, definitely consider commenting down below, reaching out to David or myself on Twitter. We want to make sure that we get a hold of you and maybe plan some future episodes.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's get into this week's topic. We have been talking a little bit just on the side about our story structures and the choices that we make and everything like that. You've kind of got a unique story structure for your series, and it changes between books, correct?
It does. Go ahead.
So why don't you tell us first about the first one and then kind of lead into the next one?
So for people who don't know, the Between Two Minds series, I'll actually grab just a quick, and it's not blurry this time.
Yay!
This cover, and this is not even a self-promotion, but the cover and the whole concept of the story Between Two Minds is encapsulated really in the title of the series, Between Two Minds. And I think, going in, I didn't want to just tell a good story. I wanted to tell it in a unique way because the topic is, I think, very conducive to that. So you follow a character who is a paraplegic. He's been paralyzed his whole life from the waist down, but he lives in the near future where he can have his mind downloaded and put into a new body that actually can walk and is fully functional and healthy and everything. And so he explores this process, and when he finds himself in this new body, suddenly he's having dreams, he's having visions, he's having flashbacks, he's not sure what's going on. And the medical professionals are saying, oh, it's normal, don't worry about it. But he can't accept that. He can't handle it because they're so real, they're so vivid, and they're not his own, that he wants to figure them out. And so when I had the idea for this whole process, I thought telling a linear story from one person's perspective just wouldn't really do it justice. And so what came to mind, and I didn't read this anywhere, I wasn't even aware that it was a thing. I knew people have done things like it, but I just kind of wrote it the way it came to me, and that is using first person past tense, but bouncing back and forth between two characters that are both moving the story forward, but you get to see things from two different perspectives, and kind of play with that, and transition in different ways. And so from the beginning, it starts off you're one character, then you go back and forth between the two characters. You kind of weave in and out, and readers have told me they get into this really cool pacing because of the way the story's told. And by the end, it all kind of dovetails into the final sequence, which brings everything together and wraps up the story. And so I think, having the reader themselves be literally between two characters or between two minds in the book lends itself to the type of story that it is. Because of story decisions that I made in book one, that type of storytelling wouldn't have worked well enough for book two. So in book two, I still wanted to have sort of a between two minds feel to it, but I couldn't do it with two main characters. So the way I did it was to be between two times to some extent. So I actually made a pretty risky choice in book two. I had the task of filling in the past of the series, sort of a prequel, and how we got to the events that were in book one. And I also had to take the events at the end of book one and move them forward. And so, a lot of experts will tell you don't write a prequel and sequel in the same book. It just doesn't work usually. First off, I was not fully aware of that when I started the process. And then the farther I got into it, the farther it just worked. And so I actually do use first person past tense to bring the main character, that story forward. But then I have this other narrative that I bring in that's all third person past tense. And so that all happens for most of the book, again, going back and forth. And then by the end of book two, it actually all comes together in third person. And there's actually a good story reason why I had to switch even the main character to third person, at the risk of, being, the story having like head hopping, as they say. If you're too busy jumping back and forth either between tenses or characters or point of views or whatever it is, at the risk of that, it made too much sense to the story and to conveying where I was taking the story to kind of pull the reader out of the head of the main character and make them third person as well. And I even, and I won't talk too much more about this, but I use chapter titles in addition to chapter numbers, which some people are like, that's just overdoing it.
What do you mean by that? Clarify.
Well, some people are like, oh, nobody remembers the chapter title anyway. Why waste creative energy coming up with chapter titles? So a lot of people are like, just put a number on it and move on. Or if you just want to call it the name, some people will do, okay, yeah, you can give it a name, but then drop the number. I did both. And
is that for both books?
Yes. It's sort of, okay. I like to sum up chapters in my head, usually with some double meaning. And so most of the time, my chapter titles, if you're looking back, it gives it more reread value. If you're rereading it, when you hit that chapter and you see the chapter title, you're going to know what it's about. And if you ever look back, you're going to say, oh, there is a double meaning there. So long story long, as I often do. When I switch from first to third person with my main character, the name of that chapter actually coincides with, it says it was something like a change in perspective, I think is the name of the chapter. And the reader's going to read it, and then I've actually, when I tell readers that, they actually, most of them didn't realize that they stopped reading in first person and started reading in third person. They're just like, oh, that's the character? Okay. And they just move on. Like people didn't realize I had done it, even though I kind of slipped it in near the end of the book. And that's the way I finish out the book.
Okay. So, and are you doing, because I know you're working on the new one, are
Hmm.
you doing similar things with that one?
So with book three is going to be a straight prequel. This time I'm not going to cram a sequel into it.
Okay.
There was a main character in book two who needed her backstory told, and I couldn't do it justice in cramming it into a bigger novel. So I want to have a novella. It might even be a little, it might even just be a short novel where I tell her story. She has a similar situation as the main character from the primary story from book one and book two. And so I'm actually going to get back to the roots of the book and go back to first person past tense for book three. But I am going to do. I have brought on a co-author, which I've hinted towards. There's not the big reveal yet. That's going to happen in a couple of months, 3 or 4 months maybe, depending. Um, but the idea that I have for this, because my I do like to challenge my readers. I like to use devices and storytelling techniques that might make them a little, uneasy, might make them work a little harder. And so I know there's trade-offs with that. But one of the ideas that I had, and this is actually something I haven't told the world, so this is something that people that are watching Writers Row are going to get a little sneak peek, is in book three, the character is also between two minds, like the first one. And having me be an author and a co-author alternate chapters, doing that interleaved narrative, is going to give them that between two minds feel, literally between two writers. And the goal with that is to um, write it in a way that it is a cohesive story, but our writing styles are different and we describe things differently. And our characters are different enough, they're completely different people and they're thrust into this mind together, and their perspectives are different and so on and so forth. And so one of the things we're working on right now is writing a single chapter that's divided in columns, and you're seeing what one perceives in addition to what the other person perceives. And so if you read left to right, you're going to see the same scene described twice. And now we're going to try to make this a shorter chapter because that's going to get repetitive. It's going to get, it is going to be a little different, but it's something we're toying with. And we think if we can pull it off, it could be pretty interesting. Literally seeing the different perspectives in the same chapter.
Cool. And I think I heard a little bit about that a previous day on a separate non
Yeah.
Writers Row conversations. So interesting. I when I read, because I've only read the first one, one of the things clicked with me was the idea of memory, right? The bouncing back and forth and stuff like that. And part of the reason I was like that, or why I am interested in that, is because my master's was looking at memory narratives. And when you talk about your second one, I always think about my final project for my master's, which was it was a story about an old beekeeper with Alzheimer's, and I had I always have to remember it now. I had the main story was moving forward, and it was when he was old, and then the B story was 20 years in the past and
Right.
playing forward. But then there was a future story that was playing from his death backwards and meeting at the end
Yeah.
of the story. So there was like these three layers going on, and and I always it was interesting because I thought I was pushing a lot and expecting a lot from my the people who were reading it, but everyone seemed to work with it. I think we adapt really well once we kind of figure out what the rules are.
Yep.
So, and as long as we're open to trying to figure out those rules as well. So,
Well, and I think when you find yourself dealing with non-traditional storytelling, I think of like Pulp Fiction in movies. I think of Memento was a movie that was told a little differently. It's tough to write those because you have to tell the story. You know, you get from start to finish to tell the story, and if you can't spoil anything, or like if you do spoil it, it has to be like, okay, so this is what we're going to get to, and it's got to be extra compelling on how we got there. You know, so if you're telling things in reverse, or if you're telling multiple timelines and they're all going to coincide, it's difficult to do. But the payoff with doing something like that is you almost feel as a reader, or if you're watching a movie, you feel like you're inside, you're in on the joke, you're in the like inside with the creative who put this together, this non-traditional, non-linear type story. And that's always appealed to me when I can sort of feel like I'm on the level and totally get where this creative is coming from. Not that there's anything wrong with linear stories. We need those. Those are things that just get us through. They're entertaining, you know, good storytelling, good character development, things like that. Those are great. I find myself just gravitating towards interesting storytelling devices. And so I tried to put a lot of that in my writing for the reader.
cool. Yeah, I love complex narratives. Um, and not just ones that have causality to them, but non-causality I like as well, where just because something happens doesn't actually lead to the next story beat or whatever, right? Um, Fractured narratives, those kind of things. I'm always fascinated with. I haven't read as many as I probably have watched because I came from filmmaking originally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm always kind of curious, and I'm always tempted by it. But I'm also very impatient. So if it's a little excessive, then I may tune out. I'm kind of curious. I'm gonna have to maybe chase after some and see what
Yeah,
I can find.
some examples are helpful there, but you know, it depends. If a story ends abruptly without closure, if there's some symbolism in the way the story ended without the closure, I think that's fine. I think that's
Oh yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
You know, if you know, especially leaving having an ambiguous ending, I think is great because, you know, depending on, you know, if it is a fractured narrative, or if you get all these different pieces, and some of them could be red herrings if you're trying to put together a bigger, you know, a bigger piece to a puzzle or a mystery or something like that. I'm okay with things going in different directions. Like you said, no, there's no like if this then this. It's just this is kind of how that story wrapped up. It's not part of any bigger piece, and so on. I think the one thing, though, is what we haven't really touched on is how risky some of these decisions are, right? And I touched upon it a little bit because some critics will say, keep it simple, tell the story, move it forward, move on. If you get too artistic with it, you know, if you try, you know, to some extent, you might look like you're pretentious, you're trying too hard, you're trying to cram in too much, you're going to lose your reader,
And
you
you
lose your
might
audience.
be.
It's true. That's always the risk, but that's also a risk if you tell a boring story. That's also a risk if you're not, you know, coupling your plot development and your character development. It's a risk if you have too many darlings and you keep going off on tangents and things like that. So I think there's many pitfalls. Um, Challenging sort of the status quo of telling a linear story, I think has its own pitfalls, but I think it's also can be rewarding. And to some extent, um, you know, the way I tell my I write my stories a lot of times is I try to make them almost like episodes in a TV series, where yeah, you're not going to know everything at the end of a chapter, like mid book, but you're going to get a small piece of it. And then you can put it down, and then you can come back and you can watch another episode or read that next chapter. And so for me, it is to some extent there is a linear nature to it, even though there's a lot of back and forth. There's a feeling of that you're going back in time. There's a feeling that you're just trapped in a dream, but the whole time everything is moving forward. It's an adventure story that takes you on a journey, and I think that's where you can overcome, losing people in different story devices that you use. If you have that, you do have to have that compelling. You do have to have the foundation of the story make sense and people buy in. You've got to have likable characters and an understandable story, and then the devices add to that rather than distract from it. And so I guess I will stop talking for a moment and breathe.
One thought that came to mind is that we were talking again off camera, and you even said to me that we were talking about a different story that we had read, and you actually said to me that you enjoyed linear storytelling, and that actually threw you off, which I thought was interesting.
No, I like continuity.
Oh, okay.
Not linearness or whatever that word is. When I feel like there's described or like if we're doing a lot of jumping in time, without purpose, I feel like I've lost something. I feel like, oh, how did we get to there? We just got to there because you took me there. But what was compelling enough to skip, oh, that was just life. And so let me tell you about this other cool thing that happened 3 years later. Okay, like I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying that the lack of
for you as a reader
is noticeable. If nothing else, it's noticeable, and that sort of pulls you out a little bit. And so when I get a story that takes me from point A to point B, whether it is, prequels, like the things that I write, if it's linear or whatever it is, don't jump too much without a good reason. Like, I don't need you to describe every little thing under the sun to me. Like, I don't need to know how many clicks the door had before you pulled it open slowly and, you're spending 4 pages describing opening a door. I don't need that. And again, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not my preference. But I like continuity. So.
Okay. The other thought I had, and we kind of started into that with your question, which was, the riskiness of it.
Right.
And I always think when we make these storytelling decisions or how we shape the story structure, yes, there is always riskiness, but as long as we are aware that by taking this choice, we may exclude some of our audience, then I'm fine going in whichever direction you want to go. And actually, independent writing, independent authors and publishing is a really great opportunity for you to try those kind of things. Because if you keep your costs low, and we're trying to talk the creative side, but not the business side, but I'm going to have to a bit in this, is that if you keep your costs low and you're not, investing a whole ton of money, then like why not try interesting choices like that may or may not pay off, right? And explore those ideas.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between quantity and quality. If you could cut out some of the innovation, cut out some of the storytelling dynamics, and tell a more common style of story, you might appeal to a wider audience. But I think that I don't know. I would rather be, take a risk and have some people think that I tried too hard and I'm pretentious, as opposed to being just another number. Now I say that, of course, we all like to sell more books, right? So it would be nice to sell more books, and I'd like to have my cake and someone feed it to me too. But I like that phrase better than, have a cake and eat it too. Because what good is a cake if you can't eat it? But so I say and feed it anyway. You get it. But but no, I think the independent channel is perfect for that. I think, one thing I think we're going to talk about in another episode is the perception that being an indie author, that some people have, being an indie author means, oh, it's probably cheap, it's probably not edited well, it's probably not going to have a good cover, and so on and so forth. But I think by, you know, offering some niche, offering some different, options can set apart indie authors. I think if you have a reader that's going in that doesn't like the idea of an independent author to begin with, they're not going to be satisfied regardless. So, people who are picking up your book, people who are reading it, give them something to remember you by. If you're just another, book in a certain genre, I mean, that's fine if you're selling books. It's fine if that's your goal, if that's your definition of success. But I like the idea of setting myself apart. And so, yeah, not only am I an independent author, but I do have a professional cover, and my storytelling is different. It's something that you are going to keep in your mind because you don't always get that. The risks are much fewer and far beyond, from my understanding, with traditional publishing because they do have to keep to their budgets. They do have to turn a profit. They do have to worry about the bottom line. I worry about that as well, but I can take risks because it's my money.
Yes. I I have an opinion. I actually really fight against people. I never want to dismiss a traditional genre story, linear, that kind of thing. Because to me, building a good story without all the other like playing with structure and everything like that, just telling it honestly, straightforward, compelling, turn in the page kind of book, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of craft. And I've watched a lot of writers unable to do that and slowly develop the tools to be able to handle that. So I will say this to my students all the time. I'm like, never dismiss the popular piece of fiction because it takes actually quite a bit to be able to tell that and get good at it. And there's a reason why a lot of those authors are at that level of popularity because they are hitting the I don't know what the right word is.
They're checking all the boxes.
Yes, but checking those boxes is hard to do. It like I say, it's a craft, and I'm not going after you, DC. It's more never attack the craft. Is what I'm saying to anyone who's like, oh.
Right, and people watching this, if they've gotten the perception that I'm totally anti-traditional publishing, that's just not the case. Like, it's partly what inspired me to become a writer. I'm not traditionally published. I have not pitched or tried to get an agent or tried to go that route. Full total respect for artists who can do that, and I think sort of getting back to this topic and the independent side of it. Some people might see that as trying to compensate for the lack of a good story or the lack of that. And I think earlier I had mentioned you got to have the foundation. You got to get the reader to buy in early. You can start playing with things once they trust you. Now, that's thin ice depending on how well you've established that trust. But again, I would rather have invested quality readers than someone who can skim through it and just get it. This is just me as an author, and to some extent me as a reader. So I'm kind of writing the book that I would like to read, and I'm not a snob. I like reading slice of life books. I like reading artistic poetry. I like reading all kinds of different things. But if you're asking me what my favorites are, I like cool twists. I like science fiction. I like different mechanics that get me to maybe I can only read 10 or 15 minutes a day, but I want the 10 or 15 minutes to be focused. I want to be able to escape. I want to have to do a little bit of work. I want it to be almost like a puzzle more than just, okay, let me get the story and move on. That's just me personally.
Maybe the book that you need to read of ours is not the one that you have, but it's the one that we're working on the sideline right now.
Well,
We're
no,
playing some stuff,
but
so
no, when I dig into yours, I'm going in knowing what I'm getting into,
yeah.
and everything that I've heard is good. So I've already, and I know you, and I kind of like you. Although I professed my love for you last video, it's been downgraded to kind of like. Um, and,
I tolerate you, Dave. Yeah.
and
Sometimes I appear on screen with you.
people who have watched this episode this long now know that I've downgraded how much I care for you. No, I'm kidding. But
I snorted. There you go.
Hey, glad it came out of that end. Um, no, but I do have every intention of reading your book series, but taking it for what it is. I know what I'm getting into, and I don't have to worry about some of the other things. I did see, you have like black dividers in between your chapters. I thought that was cool right away. Just flipping through the book, I'm like, oh, and I know it's small, but normally you don't see that. So I was, curious. I know we don't have a ton of time left in the episode.
We can save it for another episode if you want.
No, damn it, we're gonna push through more content.
Okay.
Tell me about the black dividers, Dave. I thought that was cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and do this as fast as possible. Like I said, I came from a script writing background, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we built our stories, we always build in 4 acts. The 3-act structure is really just 4 acts in my mind. And so I basically took the idea of how to write a script and applied it to how to write a novel, right? Story is story in my mind. So really those dividers are act 1, act 2, act 3, act 4.
Oh, okay.
And we've never really gotten into it, but I believe an act or those acts or those sections are their own little mini story, right? There's a start, and then we go to an end, and that pops us to the next section, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we also write our chapters. So we always have this is a small scene. We build that scene. There's an end point, and then that takes you to the next one and next one and next one. If we built it correctly, you finish that chapter, and then you're like, okay, yeah, I can set it down and rest for the night and pick it up tomorrow and get into it again. Or you burn through it like some of our readers who finish it in a day, and we're just like, okay, that took us a couple of months to work on.
Right.
Or a year, I should say. So that was always the intention of doing the dividers, and it was actually something that I think were suggested by our publisher. I think she was the one who suggested it for even just that visual. So I don't even know. Can you even see the breaks there? So
lines. Yep.
Since it was a YA novel, we were hoping that a teenager, once they figure out what it is, that's the end. So all I need to read is this section of book, and then I feel accomplished and good like that, right? But then it kind of builds on it itself. The other thing that we unintentionally did was, because of our short chapters, reluctant readers pick our books up and burn through them a lot easier. We never went out to find the reluctant readers, but it turns out that our books are perfect for we've had so many teenagers or parents who are like, my kid has not read a book in 3 years, and he's finished your book in the past couple of weeks. And it's like, right. That's fantastic. And then we've also had parents and adults, who are way past being a teenager, who say, yeah, I read your book pretty well, half of it in a bath And I'm like, okay, that was a long bath either way,
I was
but
gonna say, I thought you said bath, and I'm like, they're
it
pruny.
was. I know, like I don't sit in a bath that long, so but that's fantastic to me.
No, and
Um,
I think that's great. Shorter chapters, especially for YA, that genre, I thought that makes sense. That device, that storytelling device is perfect. I went the other direction. My chapters are pretty long, but again, I'm telling whole stories and moving the story forward in every chapter, so that's kind of just why my decision was to write longer chapters, but I
and still, I would like my preference going forward. I still think I would do short chapters no matter what.
yep.
And when I do read other people's writing, I'm like, I would have rather had a chapter break there. So I'm particular about that, where it's just like always trying to how do you help the reader along? So
Yep.
okay, we're done, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that wraps it up. I think we're calling it shoutouts now, at the
Yes.
end of the show. So let's do some shoutouts real quick. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm gonna shout out read like a mofo. Can you see that well enough? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's our part of our mofo series, I guess.
Yes.
um,
Where's it
yeah,
available?
we have Read Like a Mofo and we have Write Like a Mofo t-shirts on our website at kunusandgain.com, along with stickers. So I wish I could show it, but on the back of my laptop that I'm talking into right now is my Write Like a Mofo. So when I go to the coffee shop, I can tell people that's what my intention is. So leave me the bleep alone.
There you go. I've been pushing for a little while. Book two in the Between Two Minds series. Um, and
Root.
as you can see, it looks different than the cover of book one, and I did that on purpose. You notice there's not two heads on this one. There's only the single head, and that lends itself to why I had to make some story decisions that I did, and change the point of view. But that's available on wrighthammer.com right now. You can order a copy, and I will send it to you autographed, and you can get the ebook on Amazon.
And you can get it at kunusandgain.com.
Book one is at Kunyos
Oh
and
yeah, sorry. Oh my gosh.
right?
I'm
So
like, I'm just taking advantage of
no, now you
everything.
have to order my second book so you could say it's stocked on your website.
Now I
Uh,
have to read your second book before I decide.
exactly. So I want to thank everybody for watching this long. This is a little bit of a longer episode, and it's just Dave and me. We don't have a guest to blame this time, but I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for showing up and watching and sticking with us.
All right.
I got
Thanks,
nothing
everyone.
else. Okay, bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.